Okay. Give everyone one more minute to join. All right. All right. Good afternoon and or morning to everyone, depending, I guess, on where you are. My name is Andrew Aubrey. I am one of the Sparked TDG, AU Core TDG co-chairs. Welcome everyone to today's technical design group meeting. Would like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. For today's meeting, this is the agenda that we're going to cover. So start off with some of our usual business and updates, move into ballot reconciliation, of which we have a few things to look at today. So the results of 2 of the block votes, an issue that was referred to telecon, and then a continuation of the last TDG meeting's discussion on one of the ballot issues. After that reconciliation segment, we will move into a topic on wrapping up AU Core R1, and then finally, what's next. To start, the approval of minutes will be deferred from the October 31st meeting, will be deferred until the next TDG meeting. Those were not sent out in time for review, so they will be sent out after this meeting and in addition to this meeting's minutes. And then at the next TDG, we will vote to approve both previous TDG minutes. In terms of updates and news, these are also carried forward from the last TDG. As a reminder, we will be looking at AUCDIR2 with the updates, or AUCDIR2 with updates for the patient summary will be available for an initial review in later November, so keep an eye out for that. And then tomorrow, the Australian patient summary Fire IG will be kicking off, and the link to the project page is in there. So for those who are interested in the summary, please join us for that. All right, moving on, we're going to be discussing ballot reconciliation and where we are at for this. So as a reminder, we are doing AU Core R1 Ballot for Working Standard. We are nearly complete with reconciliation, and there are 87 issues already reconciled with 3 remaining. So we are very, very close. In terms of those, there are 70 issues for TDG reconciliation, of which we are hoping to close out 12 of those today. And there will be a single ballot issue carried forward to the fire work group next Wednesday regarding the shared IG page. So hopefully after the outcome of this meeting and the fire work group next week, we'll be able to say that all the ballot issues have been resolved and AU Core R1 has been, the ballot reconciliation has been finished, but that will be after the fire work group next Wednesday, hopefully. All right, so to start, we're going to look at the block votes for this meeting, the block votes that have come up. The first one is the block vote 7. So this included items for changes in changes to profiles for condition, medication request, and missing data requirements. Overall, this block vote has passed 13 affirmatives. There was one issue referred to Telecon regarding responder capability statement that we will discuss shortly. And then block vote 8 was also passed with 18 affirmatives. The block vote 8 included all items that are considered proposals for future consideration and use. So these were all things that the ballot feedback looked at and said, you know what, these would be for that future consideration, maybe in R2 or future versions. So any questions on the block votes? Okay. So we'll dig into the items referred to Telecon. First up is 46059. So AU Core Responder Capability Statement removes system-wide interaction conformance for search system and history system. This was requested to be referred to Telecon from the block vote. The proposal suggests removing the inclusion as they are not completely implemented, but it might be premature to make that change. So Heath provided a comment, and I would like to open the floor for discussion. Heath, if you want to start with why you requested to refer this to Telecon and the background on this issue.
So one of the other items in this same block vote, you just took it away. 46060 was found persuasive to remove May requirements from the IPS, from the IG, and this one was found non-persuasive, and I guess I've been also involved in a number of other changes along the way where we've been removing mays and things like that, just to I guess reduce some of the content in here. So I just felt that it was worth having a conversation around not just this one, but I guess a sort of a precedent to move forward around the idea of when is something may to be included in the implementation guides and when is it not. So it just felt to me like there was some inconsistency around how we were making decisions of what's may and what's not.
Okay. Any thoughts from the group on that?
Yeah, can I was like you, Heath, after the last meeting. I was thinking there are mays here that are superfluous mays. They truly are may. Like if you're going to provide a title or a particular key value, and you're going to supplement that with a description, well, that's just a superfluous may. But there are mays like that search condition may that actually have impact, and they change, they cause the system to behave differently. They form part of the package, the information package. And I think there's a very big distinction between those two types of mays. It's like, it's all like almost like a may and optional. And with the mays that are a description, those mays are sort of like, well, why would you? Why would you add that information? It doesn't really add anything. But on the other ones, they are just they're an optional parameter.
Yeah, and I guess one of the comments that was made in 46059 to justify the non-persuasiveness was that it was without concrete examples that in my original request of removing them on the evidence of too premature to make this change to remove it. I kind of argue the opposite, that it's too early to know to actually include it. So I guess that's really the when is it important enough to include, when is it not, and those sorts of things. So if we can, this is more from my perspective, trying to get some sort of understanding for the TDG on when are we going to use may and when not to.
Danielle?
Yeah, so from my perspective, when we use may is, so I mean, it's documented what may is, why things with may in them are there. It's written on the capability statement to just draw people's attention. Because I mean, these mays, whether they're written in the AU Core IG or not, don't change the normative requirement. These ones, it's may whether it's written or not. Everything is permitted unless it's a shall not, and that is equivalent of may. So I guess it's in terms of, we obviously don't want to write every single possible thing, because that's the fire standard, and AU Core is meant to be a set of rules on top of the fire standard and drawing people's attention. So we really only want to do may for where we think there's something relevant to bring people's attention to it. If we don't think that these things are relevant, and that's for us to discuss and go, well, is this actually relevant to draw people's attention to them? If it's not, they shouldn't be there. If we think, hang on, no, for some reason we think that it's really worth highlighting these things that may be of relevance, then that's one of the big reasons why we should have them as may. So I guess that's my 2 cents. I don't mind either way because it doesn't change the requirements for AU Core.
Thank you, Danielle. Andy?
I mean, I think it's a valid point he raises, and the challenge is that the more ethereal the reasoning, the harder it is to be consistent. But I guess I fall back on kind of more an architecture perspective where the relationship between an traditional kind of client server is that if something is a may for a client, then it's a mandatory for a server. But likewise, if something is mandatory for a server, it can be either mandatory or optional for the client. So I think in terms of looking at the mays in isolation, you actually have to look at the broader interrelationship between the different actors in order to contribute to the reasoning about whether extraordinary kind of documentation around a may is appropriate, rather than simply looking at in isolation in the one actor, and that I think is a far more difficult reasoning to justify in some ways. So that's my kind of architecture hat perspective.
Thank you, Andy. Tim?
Yeah, similarly, if I put my architecture hat on, having worked in systems across multiple industries, and multiple REST APIs and so forth, you always look to minimize the footprint of your service calls and make them very explicit and clear. Anything that is superfluous shouldn't be included. So it's sort of like to include things because it might be significant or it may happen, or it's well, let's wait and see if it does happen, and if it does happen, and we have the extensibility element if we need to add extra color to the parameters. Yeah, but from a purely architecture perspective, you always look to minimize the footprint, and these may seem to go against it a little bit.
Thank you, Tim. Richard?
Got it. It strikes me part of this is, where does the onus of proof lie? Do we want to put the onus of proof on the people who want to offer a may in there, saying our presumption is we don't have mays unless you give a good strong reason why? In which case it's enough to say, you haven't given me a good enough reason to have a may in there, to say rule it out. Of course, the other side is to say that we'll let you put it in if you think it's a good idea, unless we've got a reason to exclude it. I think I prefer the first one, which is it's sufficient reason to dismiss a may that you haven't given a good enough reason to include it. And possibly part of what we've got going on here is one justifying inclusion and the other one justifying exclusion. And I think mays we need a justify to include, otherwise they get excluded.
Agree.
Sounds to me like someone could make a motion at this point. I think we're all saying basically the same thing. I mean, unless there is someone who is able to, I guess, shed light on why a search system or history system they think is particularly relevant at this stage for inclusion in AU Core R1. It's really seeming like we're saying, actually, it's really not that relevant at this point. So it shouldn't be there because it doesn't meet our reason for inclusion.
I'm happy to move to make the original request to remove them as persuasive.
Okay, thank you, Heath. There's a motion. Heath motions to make the request persuasive. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'm happy to second if you want.
Thank you, Tim, for seconding. So the motion is to make this issue 46059 persuasive, to remove the capability statement for system-wide interaction based on our discussions. Is there any other questions, clarifications, or points that anyone wants to make? Okay. I'm going to launch a poll to vote for the current motion. So vote affirmative if yes, you want to make this persuasive, and negative if you do not.
As a co-host, I can't vote, so I am +1 for affirmative, please. I've also put that in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the results of the poll is that it passed in the affirmative. So this issue will be persuasive, and then the capability statement will be removed. The results of the poll are 33 out of 39, including Danielle's vote for affirmative, no and negatives, and 6 of the 39 votes abstaining. All right. With that, we can move on to continuing the discussion from the previous TDG. As a reminder, this is along the lines of revisiting a previous issue. To remind you guys that revisiting a TDG decision will require a 2/3 majority vote to reopen. It requires a formal reopening of the issue. This is something that was previously looked at in the ballot for comment in March. So as we discussed that, these are the practices we'll need to follow for that. So the question to the group and the discussion topic from the previous TDG on the 31st of October is, do we revisit MustSupport on MedicationRequest.doNotPerform? So the original decision from the ballot for draft comment period was on issue number 45234. Medication requests do not perform to be included as MustSupport. It was found to be non-persuasive. There was a use case mentioned. It was non-persuasive that the do not perform should be treated as a minimum element. The use case is not relevant to ordering and prescribing for the use of this resource. Issue number 47067 has raised that for revisiting. Can take a look at that really quick. this was identified as a revisit of that original one. So does anyone want to speak to the conversation that was happening at the previous TDG meeting, or pick up on where we left off on this issue discussion?
Although it was lodged by me, Dave McKillop, this is actually, I just wrote them up. Stephen's the one who wrote it up in the agency thing, and I just, so unfortunately Stephen's on leave this week and doesn't seem to be on the call.
Well, wasn't there some other participant or some other contact at the agency that when we reached out to the agency about whether if they wanted to pursue the revisiting?
I can talk to it without being having worked out exactly what my position on this is. So what we do is we've got a modifier element, and the thing is the modifier element. So as we have it at the moment, you don't have to. The specification says you don't have to support it. However, the rules for a modifier element say that if you populate it, if you get one which is populated, whether or not it has MustSupport, if you don't understand it, you're not allowed to process it. So we've sort of got this, as I understand it, we've got this interesting tension between MustSupport elements and modifier elements. It's possible that a way forward would be for us to, so that says there's this sort of got to be aware of it requirement that comes through, which is hidden when people just look at MustSupport. So it's possible that there should be something coming down from higher levels, which highlights this aspect of modifier elements. Another one would be to look at now not all values in the modifier element modifying values, I think. So if we were to prohibit the modifying values in this use case, then you wouldn't have to support it. We just say, no, you can't say, for instance, you can't say do not perform. And if you can't say do not perform, then nobody has to support it. Because if you do say it, then it's invalid, but there's no actual need to support it. So I think those sorts of things play around in this space, and I haven't thought through enough to see where it lands, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Richard. Andy?
That's well said, Richard. And I guess I just wanted to put 2 cents in around do not perform as a modifier for requests. And I know this is not medication request, but we certainly use do not perform in communication request. And it's actually a really useful tool. And I think in the same way with medication requests, I think kind of from what Richard said, we either have to say, you're not allowed to use this at all, as in it's maximum 0, or if it is available, it actually has to be MustSupport. Because I don't think you can have one foot in each camp. Certainly, I can think of a use case for using do not perform, and that is where you want to record somewhere that certain medication should not be requested for this patient, which is kind of akin to what we do in communication request. We use it as a consent in a communication request, but in effect it's saying do not communicate with someone. So I'm actually a fan of it. I quite like it, even though it's a bit kind of out there.
So I'm gonna say that I think at best that's R2 business. As Richard stated, what the meaning of modify is, regardless of whether or not a standard is put to MustSupport and said what MustSupport means for their IG. The fire standard says some rules around, it's a fire standard rule of what happens with modifier elements. And in AU Core and in other IGs like US Core IPS, you put MustSupport and you explain what that means in your context, which is on top of fire standards rules. And our meaning of MustSupport doesn't mean that about modifiers. It doesn't address the modifier kind of content. We've got requester and responder and what they're meant to do. So even if we put MustSupport on here, it doesn't do that what is being talked about in the fire standard, because that's fire standard rules. So while I recognize that modifier elements in fire exist, and there's an expectation though of people being fire native. So whether or not we ever put MustSupport on this, there are some rules on how you need to treat particular elements and the rules in the fire standards. So I don't in principle think that it's a bad idea for us to consider in AU Core in future if we make explicit the fire standards rules around how to treat some things in modifier by re-representing them with maybe MustSupport an obligation and picking an obligation code that means that. But I will say for R1, putting MustSupport on it doesn't do what we've just talked about. So I think it's an interesting idea for an enhancement to make things more understandable, noting that AU Core IPS and none of the others have this marked as MustSupport. Because it's a standard part of the core fire specification. So I'm not in favor of it for R1, and I think that would need to be considered as part of an enhancement on if we actually go down that route to treat modifier elements, which it's not just limited to this one, it would apply to others that already have MustSupport on it. And we want to surface up, almost like the May discussion, some parts of the fire standard that may be hidden to others. That's my thought on how we would tackle that if we decide that that's something that we want to make more explicit.
Thank you, Danielle. Heath?
I agree pretty much with what Danielle's just said. It's, it's an underlying principle of fire that, elsewhere we've basically are not repeating things that have already been stated in fire. The problem I have is if we do it for this one, then we've got so many others modifier elements that we have to also address in the same way, especially if we're going to go down the route of what was suggested of excluding its use, etc. So yeah, that's my concern. I mean, in this particular case, I note there is only 3 modifier elements, and 2 of them we already have as MustSupport. So this is the 3rd one. So it's not huge, but it is still a significant piece of work.
Our marking of MustSupport doesn't address fires like what do you have to do with a modifier element, because our obligation definitions for what does MustSupport mean in AU Core isn't what modifier element is. So just because it's marked MustSupport doesn't necessarily address what might be the root cause. So I don't think this is persuasive the way it's written. If what we actually want to do is an enhancement in future to surface up things like maybe just modifier or maybe other things, that is a separate thing with a different kind of set of obligations and so forth to re-represent those principal rules.
Thank you, Danielle. Brett?
I think, what Danielle's saying makes sense. I mean, even if we were to add, if we were to try and represent this with obligations, what is actually needed to handle the modifier elements, it would only be on requesters, because really it's a receiver's responsibility to deal with it. And having said that, like we've got no error as our sort of default requester obligation, and that wouldn't be adequate to handle the modifier obligations. And I'm not even sure how you'd express it. Maybe handle with the definition, but it's I think that would need exploration anyway if we were going to try and do it. And it's really just repeating what the underlying fire spec says. So I think there might be, it is a trap for players, because if that is populated, you now have an obligation that you didn't know about as a receiver. But it is also part of the spec. So I think yeah, we should probably consider that more broadly and say how should we approach it. It might be that we need to add information to our conformance pages to explain, pay attention to modifiers, which is just repeating what's in the spec, but it's just a highlight that you can point out when people say I had a problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Brett. Richard.
A couple of things here. One, there are other modifier elements in medication requests. So there's implicit rules, which is a modifier element that nobody uses. So it's not likely to cause problems because nobody uses it. This one becomes interesting because do not perform is a fairly simple thing to try and do something with. We could manage it just by ensuring there's enough education of this little gotcha in the fire specification, which isn't something that sits there in this particular resource, but somehow it winds up being well, let's ensure people are sophisticated enough that they know there's this little gotcha. The other one is we could say that in AU Core version 1, medication request do not perform of true is not valid, that we're not intending to do that. If you want to say do not perform, then you can't do it in an AU Core version 1 profile. And that we can then have a public debate about whether or not we'll make that possible in AU Core version 2. And then that winds up being a rather roundabout way of putting it in everybody's face that they've got to have to pay attention to MustSupport elements. I'm not sure that's a good strategy, but it is a way of getting everybody to notice this thing and to avoid having any dangerous uses of it as passing through R1, the first release of AU Core.
Thank you, Richard. Heath.
Again, it's like we're going to have to do it everywhere if we start doing that. Right? There's other resource types that have got these modifiers that we don't have, including things like observation. So for me, again, coming back to use case, what's the use case for AU Core? Is it a core use case? How often does this use case occur? I think we're just in this 1%er perspective. I'm not saying it's not potentially dangerous, but the fire standard does already deal with it. And I just don't think it's core of the core. I mean, Andy's saying he's got a use case for communication requests, but that I just personally cannot see in community representation of medication requests why we would be stating that something is do not perform on a regular basis.
Thank you, Heath.
Well, if no one's saying it, then it's not a problem if we prohibit it.
No, but AU Core. So we shouldn't just go, oh, well, AU Core should by default prohibit things. We don't prohibit in AU Core because this needs to cover all possible use cases, or rather allow for them, and then we set what are the minimum requirements for the core of the core, and we're going to evolve and expand. At this point, I don't think we have a consensus on how this should be treated. So it's not defined in AU Core, it's living in whatever the fire rules are. I think when we do have a defined position, we'll include it. But again, this really doesn't seem to me like we can make this determination in AU Core R1. I think this has to continue on and evolve through use and implementation and feedback and coming in.
So I guess for today, are we voting on a revisit, or are we?
I guess,
is there a motion to revisit?
Yes. So for today, if the issue that was raised during ballot and for reconciliation was marked as a revisit, one that would need to be revisited. So to the group, we would need to either see a motion to revisit and a vote on that, or a motion to say that this was properly, we do not wish to revisit it. So we would like to see a motion one way or the other.
right. And because currently what it's saying right now is that when I have a medication request, you can put into the request, don't do this request, is ultimately, I guess, we're trying to make sure we're clear about what the message we're trying to send here, right? So even though you've requested for this, don't fill it.
So currently we're saying nothing.
Yep.
And the original request was to make it must support so that it would
So
had
that you can
some
say
mechanism.
nothing. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and we've basically gone back and said, no, we don't think this is persuasive to make it must support. And now we're being asked to revisit that decision.
Yeah, as a point of order too, I think we just need to have a motion to revisit, and if that motion doesn't come, it is decided, because we've already decided this, right? So I think all we need to do is, is decide if we're going to revisit this or not. If it's not, the co-chairs can say dispose of it as already the decision's been made.
I mean, I think that's been obvious. I'm not in favour of revisiting this at least in AU Core R1 without us having some further substantial kind of information. So in order to make that decision, what we're saying is someone needs to motion to revisit, and then I can vote negative.
The other aspect of this is Stephen's not here, who, if he was here, is likely to put the motion forward.
But this has already been held over and it's not
anyone
required
can put the
to.
motion forward.
Yes.
I know, but if no one brings forward a motion, and I don't know whether Richard or
I'll bring forward. I'll
on.
bring forward a motion that we need to revisit this thing. I think my argument for that is at the moment it will be, implementers may be unaware that if this element's populated and they don't know what to do with it, they're in trouble. And so there is a risk there. And I think an easy way to solve that risk for them is to say, you can't use the element. If you use the element, you're not AU Core, because AU Core wasn't designed with the idea of saying do not perform. That's not part of the AU Core R1 context of implementation.
So Richard, thank you. You've motioned to revisit 45234 in light of 47067. Is there a second for the motion?
I will second, so we can move to a vote.
Thank you, Danielle. So there is a motion to revisit 45234 with the new issue of 47067. As a reminder, to reopen this issue, it will require a 66% majority affirmative vote. So I'm going to now launch this poll. So you will have about 30 seconds to vote for revisiting 45234.
Can you vote against your second? What you said you second?
I don't see why. I would think it's a fairly standard piece of procedural stuff.
The motioning and seconding is more for the group on what we are going to vote on, not necessarily whether you vote one way or the other. So that's been about 45 seconds with so I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Landon, Josh, and Danielle, I don't think so. These totals won't include yours, but we are looking at 5 of 42 as affirmative, which is less than 13%. So the motion to reopen this issue does not pass. So we will not be revisiting 45234.
Sorry, can I just get the stats on those numbers, please, as well?
Sorry. 5 out of 42 voted affirmative to revisit. 20 out of 42 voted negative, and 17 out of 42 abstained.
Lovely, thanks.
Okay, moving on, as a reminder, or where we are at currently, as of today, we will have worked through 69 of the 70 issues for TDG reconciliation. So with those block votes and the 2 issues we discussed today, we are 1 issue away from finishing AU Core R1 ballot reconciliation. As a reminder, the fire work group next Wednesday will be addressing the final issue, which is dealing with some of the implementation guide pages and the presentation of that. So if you are interested in contributing to that last issue, please attend the fire work group next week. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about wrapping up AU Core R1. With that, I'm going to hand it to Danielle to discuss some of the next steps.
Righto, I think you can probably keep sharing, and I'll just prompt you to move slide. So out of this meeting and the next firework group, we'll, I guess, hit step 4 of 6. So back when I was running through what actually happens in the ballot period, which was back in August, I think, and we went through where we're up to in step 4 is going through and making a determination based on the ballot feedback of what changes, if any, we're going to make to the AU Core R1. And then what are we going to put in our backlog, and what are we just saying, no, we're not going to address? The next couple of steps that are part of the ballot process are the withdrawal part. So after the fire work group meeting next week, assuming I guess that's actually determined in the next firework group, which means that all the items that had come before us for AU Core R1 ballot have now been gone through. Then at that point, I'm going to request that HL7 Australia contacts the balloters to let them know that it's now the withdrawal period in JIRA as to whether or not they accept the resolution. That typically happens for like people who voted negative, but it can also happen for positive. It's a really, really useful thing. And I'm going to encourage anyone who was actually part of the ballot period and was a voter to consider going through and withdrawing where you agree on the resolution, because that closes the loop for us, I guess, where someone has raised an item as to whether or not they agree with that. And then on step 6, we need to confirm if the ballot passed or if reballoting is required through JIRA. I can spoiler that and say, no, we've passed. We passed before we started. We had reached our required, we'd reached the required approval voters from our consensus group. And I wish I had the link to that so that we could go through and show it on where that's at, but I don't have a link handy for some reason. So we'll do that in our next meeting where we just confirm like what the numbers are and where the withdrawal process is at. So essentially we have, from the ballot's perspective, approval to publish, but that's not the final thing. So we obviously have to go through and apply the agreed changes. The team with Dushika and Jamie and John Carter and Brett and a few other people who've been contributing have been working through what's been agreed so far. And I think they're up to, I think it was around 50% of what's already being decided is in the IG. So they're pretty much on pace. And as that goes through, there needs to be some like validation and QA checks. So it's probably really not the end here for people looking at the AU Core draft. If you spot anything or there's a technical issue or you think, oh, hang on, something's come up, then we still want to go through and fix those. So the same thing kind of applies if you think you've spotted a defect or that's been introduced through the change process. And also, I guess, if anything changes and we decide or identify anything that's really critical for R1 that needs to be addressed, even though it may not have been marked in ballot. So while those changes are being made, we're also going to now move on to our FMM2 endorsement, or it's now called AFFM for the Australian FMM levels. We went through that period before ballot to go through level 1. And now we're going to go through and look at FMM2 endorsement of AU Core artifacts and go through and do some testing. There's the connectathon in December. So the draft, there'll be a snapshot of the AU Core IG done for the connectathon. And that one will essentially have all the normative changes and probably the vast majority, if not all, of the informative changes coming out of ballot, so that that can then just be tested at the connectathon and checked as part of like a final validation and QA check. So when we're all kind of ready to go, which will be, I think will really be in January at that part, we'll do a run through with this group to go like, here it is now, it is done, and go through if there are any outstanding warnings or errors in the QA.html, just to confirm what they are and accept those before moving for publication approval from the firework group. Again, they're our governing body, and going into publication. Now, AU Core is dependent on AU base, so we do need AU base kind of moving, and it's going at the same pace. So that'll be good. There'll be the draft that gets generated for the connectathon for AU Core will include in it all the content coming from base. So there'll be a snapshot of base that gets generated for that connectathon as well. So that'll have all the normative stuff in it. So we'll be taking that kind of full normative into the connectathon, and it'll be publicly available for people to test. So that's basically the steps until publication, which our original timeline is end of January. We're still aiming for that. Some of that depends on when the groups are meeting in January, because, you know, nobody likes to come back early, and we need to go through and get those approvals essentially to publish, and then we'll go ahead and do that. So we're still all on track for that kind of publication date. And that's basically what happens for finishing off AU Core. Any questions around what happens with, I guess, wrapping up a particular ETH? And AU base is going through basically the same steps at pretty much a very similar timeline to go through all of these as well. Although I think some of theirs are moving beyond AFFM2 and other levels of endorsement, including 3 probably. Righto. So next one, which is really just a visual of the same thing. Where are we? We're almost at the end. Basically, we're on track for what that time frame was, around the 18-month period to get to an R1 release of AU Core, which means that it's now really off in the hands in the background doing fixes, and we get to move on. So do you want to pop to the next slide, Andrew? Which is this view of maturing the baseline and where we are now, and where we started back in actually, I'm not going to make it up. Sorry, I'm back from international travel, so I'm still a little bit tired. Way back when we first started, and we had a bunch of draft content, and we went through and did a whole bunch of workshops and connectathons and meetings, and went through and started building the JIRA and content through that. We went through the QA period, and we've done a ballot for comment. We went, yes, we're now at FMM1, we accept this content, and we've got these things in scope. We spent a lot of time moving things out of scope. We had a whole kitchen sink of potential things that we were going to work through. We've gone through and refined that and done a whole bunch of testing with a whole number of fabulous organizations who've come through and provided those results over the last 8 months. And then gone through the ballot for working standard, which means we're now in that final phase, really, of what we were planning as moving through that resolution of the working standard and coming into the final part of testing to check where we're at for our artifacts and also go through and ensure that as we're making those final changes, everything is ready before we publish. So really that's where we're at. We're at the stage of confirming where we are with our maturity levels for the baseline on AFFM2, which I think means here I'll hand back to you, Andrew, to kick off that discussion that we've kind of been leading to this point around FMM levels for AU Core.
Great, thanks, Danielle. Yeah, so as we're talking about the maturity model, we have these specific levels for HL7 Australia for the fire maturity model. All of our AU Core profiles are currently at AFFM1. And in order to raise those to AFFM2, the profiles or relevant artifacts have to have been tested and successfully support interoperability among at least 3 independently developed systems. So 3 systems must test and report on these, leveraging most of the scope of the profile, so at least 80% of the core data elements, and then having appropriate data and scenarios for those. So as we look at our profiles and the testing we've been doing over the past few months with AU Core R1, we can already report that these profiles fully meet and exceed the AFFM2 criteria. So for these profiles, all of the elements have 100% coverage across testing done by the listed amount of systems. So what this means is that, for example, for allergy intolerance, 12 systems have tested this, and between those 12 systems, we have tested and demonstrated 100% of the MustSupport and mandatory elements. So these are the profiles that meet and exceed the AFFM2 level of at least 3 systems covering at least 80% of the data. With that, there is a JIRA ticket that raises moving these artifacts to AFFM2. So that JIRA ticket specifically calls out those artifacts and profiles listed on the previous slide. And to move those, the ticket request to move those to AFFM2. So all of these have already achieved AFFM1, and the testing has been performed as part of the Sparked group to validate that these are fit for purpose. Are there any questions on this JIRA ticket?
How many AU Core R1 artifacts are not available to go to AFFM2? Are there any?
Yes, there are some additional ones that are not part of this ticket that we'll cover off after this. So after we look at these, the next slide does have some of these additional profiles that will discuss what needs to happen with those. So
yeah, off the top of my head, Richard, I don't know. Then I think they're all good, but we're starting baby steps.
That next slide answers my question quite wonderfully. Yep. Thank you.
Well, I think, hang on, because there's a difference between, sorry, just on the next slide, on meeting AFFM criteria and going above and beyond, which is
yeah. So and we'll discuss what's the next steps for those additional profiles, right? So that as we know that the profiles listed here in this ticket are not all the profiles in AU Core R1. We'll discuss what that means for those additional profiles shortly and what needs to happen next for those. But these are the ones that have had 100% element coverage by at least 3 systems. So they're the ones that are currently in the ticket for the group to look at moving to AFFM2.
Can you just say what the reference to scenarios means? I just wonder, given the general nature of AU Core, are we calling out that there are inappropriate scenarios versus appropriate scenarios? What is the value add of that to this maturity level description? And in particular, if that is a criteria that is not met, how does it not get met?
Maybe the adjective appropriate only applies to the data and doesn't also apply to scenarios.
So I thought the review of what description, did we all understood what it meant, happened over like 2 fire working group meetings before I went on leave. And I don't know if this matches the latest one. I assume it does. This should just be a copy and paste from the wording approved from the fire work group.
It's on the website. Yeah, that's right.
So how does AU Core interpret this?
I think it's like at a connectathon. So what have we been testing is probably really the answer, I think, or one answer to your question. So we've been doing these test events, we've been doing connectathons. So as part of those scenarios that we've been doing at those events, that's appropriate. What's inappropriate? I don't think that we're saying anything's inappropriate. It's just that these are the appropriate scenarios that we've identified as part of our connectathon and Spark test events.
Now, it's an interesting question for AU Core. I think it would be easier to talk about inappropriate scenarios for other IGs. To come up with a list of or with inappropriate ones for AU Core, I've got to admit I hadn't thought about it. So I mean, most of you have been at the Connectathon and have seen what people have been going through with their scenarios in terms of, most of you are on the line on what your scenario is, and I think they all fall within AU Core around what Create IT's been doing in Telstra Health and Halo Connect and best practice, and that all is within what I was thinking with AU Cores. I don't know if I can't think of anything I've seen that comes up as being potentially inappropriate.
Yeah, I think if you have much more specific use cases, that would be a discussion you might have where you have, I think e-requesting, you might have cases where people are doing things with those, that you might think is not relevant to that spec. So it's.
Does that mean that, like, when we make calls on fit for purpose, do we need to then go back to making sure that we all understand the AU Core purpose, which in theory is generic? Like, there is nothing that's out of scope.
I think so, and I'm thinking in like e-requesting where you have scoped things like hospital diagnostic requesting is out of scope. That's probably an inappropriate scenario, whereas because of our all-inclusive nature of AU Core, everything's appropriate. As long as it's not in the space of maybe create and update and that kind of stuff. But again, I think it's open to interpretation. All of these definitions, I've got to admit, while I was looking at AFFM 2 and definition, and we were trying to work out how does that relate to capability statements and things like that. These aren't easy to necessarily understand what they're actually suggesting.
Maybe a practical approach to a scenario is regarded as appropriate unless somebody convinces enough members of the working group that it's not appropriate.
Yep. I mean, the fact that there's probably a lot of primary care systems, we've got a lot of acute care systems. They're all operating in Australia. They all sound pretty appropriate from an AU Core perspective. The main thing here, and if we think about the definition of AU Core, is that it is patient specific. We're not necessarily going into population health as such, because we have this requirement of at least a patient. It's not a provider directory one, all those sorts of things. So it is patient centric. scenarios.
But I think we've got to be clear that, and this I think is where the AUCDI focus around the clinical record needs to be clear that this is not restricted to the medical record assumption about clinical content, because this will be used for other purposes beyond the record, which will include clinical transactions, clinical administration, and all those kind of things. And if they're not then part of the intended use, I think we need to be clear about that.
So to kind of bring it back to the ticket and moving to FMM2, Andy, is there something different that you are looking to have documented or a proposal to add for specific data or scenarios that you want to see tested prior to moving it to AFFM2?
No, I just want the description to be accurate as to the scope. And if you can just reference, like it's talking about the declared scope, can we reference that scope?
Not necessarily in this blurb, because this is the blurb that is, or this is the text that is in the AU base IG to define what AFFM2 is.
I think the scope is really defined by the IG itself, a core scope.
I think a bunch of work is done by the fact that the results have been accepted by the FIRE working group. So I think there's room there for a lot of it being, well, we convinced the people on the day, so that was good enough going forward. And so that then puts stuff on us as a working group to understand what's required.
I think in terms of declared scope, which yes, the AU Core IG says here's what AU Core does, which is super generic, and it has potential usage scenarios which are super generic, and it says in its profile definitions what it does, which is just about the ability to like read or search for in this case, basic location information or basic patient demographics. And those are on each of the profiles, and that's what has been tested.
Great.
So should we note in the minutes in particular, do you think there's some kind of wording that would be really helpful on how we note the scope of the AU core artifacts that would go towards mitigating that concern, Andy?
Well, yes, I think some wording because we have no formal use of AU core. It's not referenced in any policy, any implementation requirement for industry. So it's kind of a bit of a catch-all at the moment until it gets a purpose in life. And without such a purpose, then any discussion around scope or scenarios is left as an exercise to the reader. And if as you say, you can generically search for a practitioner. Yes, searching for a practitioner within a medical record is a different thing than searching for a practitioner within a transaction database. But all of these, we're not saying. So it would help to say we have no constraint on the scenario, because this is all implying there is a scenario, there is a scope of use. But I think at this point in time, we're saying we have no constraint. And I think it's easy, it would be useful to say that, because it's not clear from the pathway we've taken where anyone with a an interesting idea about its use, we don't have any measure to say, no, we don't have any reasonable one to say, no, don't do that at the moment. And there's experience to come, obviously, but that would be useful.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. Let's note that in the minutes.
Okay, so noting in the minutes that there's no current constraints or external constraints on the AU core scenarios, such as by policy or things that we will be using to guide that. For these, we do have the base declared scope in the IG already. And then in the minutes, we'll note that there's no external constraints for these. So thank you, Andy. Back to the JIRA ticket. Is there any additional discussion, questions, or thoughts on moving these to AFFM2, or is there any motions to the group?
I'll motion that that this is persuasive, that these AU core artifacts should be marked as AFFM2.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Danielle
I'll
has motion.
I'll second that.
And Danielle has motion to make this issue persuasive, and Richard has seconded. With that,
No, that was Marvin, I thought.
Oh, sorry, Marvin. Marvin has seconded.
Yep.
I only unmuted. Marvin spoke first.
That's what I was watching, unfortunately. All right. So I've launched a poll for the current motion to mark this issue as persuasive, that these artifacts should be AFFM2. Leave this vote for about 25 more seconds. And I'll close it in 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. This motion has passed with 32 of 36 voters voting affirmatively, 0 of 36 voting negatively, and 4 of 36 abstaining. All right. Moving on. As we referenced earlier, there are profiles and resources that have not that were not included in this yet. These profiles marked with orange are profiles that we are seeking additional coverage. So for these, not all MustSupport elements or mandatory elements have been tested by greater than 3 systems. There's a couple elements for each of these that we would still like to seek coverage on. That being said, these do overall meet the AFFM2 criteria as is, but we would just like to seek for the next few weeks additional testing coverage. With that, we will look at also voting on these for AFFM2 at an upcoming meeting, because they do meet that base level. All right. Moving on, we're going to cover off kind of what's next. Some of the upcoming meetings through the end of the year. The next TDG meeting will be the 28th of November. During that meeting, we will be covering those remaining elements for AFFM2. So AU Core R1, looking at moving those to AFFM2, and then begin discussing AU Core R2. In December, as a reminder, we have the HL7AU Connectathon and Melbourne face-to-face. During that face-to-face meeting, we will have a R2 scoping workshop on the 12th of December. And then in January, we will have, we'll kick off the TDG at the beginning of the year with AU Core R2. There is a question to the group, and I'll hold a poll very shortly to check if we want to do our first TDG meeting of January 2025. I apologize for that typo. Of January 2025 on the Thursday, the 9th of January, or the 23rd of January. I believe for the 23rd of January, it's worth calling out that that is a Thursday before a holiday weekend. So just keep that in mind. But for now, I'll launch the poll for when we want to pick up in 2025. Okay, give this about 5 more seconds. So closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Have one additional vote from the group chat. So 7 out of 36 voted for January 9th, 18 out of 36 voted for January 23rd, and 11 out of 36 abstained. So it looks like the TDG meetings will resume on January 23rd of 2025 after the holidays. All right. As mentioned, the AU Core R2 scoping workshop is Thursday, December 12th in Melbourne. This is a half-day workshop to look at the overall scope of AU Core R2. It's an in-person only event. Spaces are limited. Danielle has previously sent out an email regarding this. So take a look at that email, or for your organization, email sparked@csiro.au to reserve your organization's 2 spots. And then additionally, there's the HL7 AU Fire Connectathon, a 2-day event in Melbourne also. Basic test scenarios for AU Core R1 and basic patient summary test scenarios. So please be sure to register via Eventbrite. That'll be on Thursday, the 12th of December, and Friday, the 13th of December, at the Melbourne Connect building.
Which, I mean, at this stage, because it's getting quite close now, those Eventbrite tickets are gone. So if you've missed out, just email events@hl7.com.au. Oh yeah, Isabel's popped that in the chat. Thanks, Isabel.
All right, and then with that, I'm going to give it to Danielle to talk about some forward planning.
Sure. So this is more the highlight for next meeting. So basically, this is the last ballot reconciliation really for R1 for this like fortnightly set of meetings, and now we're going on to doing that wrap up stuff, the FMM2, and transitioning into AU Core R2 and what's going to be happening next year, and kind of forward looking. We're going to start having that conversation next meeting. And Kylin's joined me today, who's going to do a little brief kind of what is that forward looking and the timings coming from AU CDI R2 as well, because there's obviously that work that's been going on in the, well, I won't actually call it the background, in the clinical design group around AU CDI R2. So our next meeting is really coming into talking about what are we going to do and how are we going to do our work around AU Core R2, and also looking, I think, at some of those scope drivers from e-requesting, from patient summary, from AU CDI R2 and so forth. And then December, do a bit of scoping and planning, and then next year is moving on to that next project, onto R2. We've got, he's been doing a lot of really good work to kind of pull together a backlog that we're going to start going through. What's the backlog? How do we want to work with it in our next meeting to drive some of that work going forwards? And that's what we're going to be doing next year, is continuing on the AU Core work and into the R2 space. And obviously, R1 gets published in January, and an AU Core reference set will also be released, and test data as well, hopefully February. But again, some of that will depend on when we get publication approval and when do people come back. You know, maybe the firework group doesn't want to come back in January like we don't, and so it might end up being Feb that we get the tick of approval and hit the publish button. All right, that's it for that slide. Let's pop to the next one. Okay, before I hand over to Kylin, I just wanted to go next meeting. So next meeting, we're going to just confirm ballot reconciliation is complete, or if not, what were the outcomes from that firework group meeting. do some of the FMM2 endorsement, and Kylene's going to come back and actually start going through some of the AUCDI R2, because that should be out and we can start looking at that and getting into scoping. But I want to put this to the group. Is there anything else we need to be talking about at next meeting? Which is really our last meeting for the year, noting we're going to have a scoping workshop. Marvin.
May not necessarily have to be for next meeting, but one of the things that we do need to do is we need to approve the vision, the mission and status for our AU Core. It's something that we've had the draft status out for a long while, and it's just something that we haven't, rounded out. So probably it will be an electronic vote that will come out. I'm just posting the link to that into the actual mission statement in the chat. So if you want to head over to that and just familiarize yourself with that, and then we'll put out an electronic vote to just approve that so that we can get that ticked off.
So put out the electronic vote during the next meeting, or put it out before it and talk about the results at the next meeting?
I think we put it up before that.
Okay.
So
yeah, okay. So you'll send out an email?
Yep.
All right. Okay.
Thanks.
Sounds good. Anything else that people want to add onto the agenda? And if something like comes up in between meetings, you can always email me or one of the other co-chairs to say, hey, we need to be talking about this thing at the next meeting. All right. So I think next slide. And I think we need to hand over to Kylie to wrap up the meeting with providing the update from AUCDI and CDG.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So just a really quick update from me, just to kind of say, because I think it's been a while since I've come. As the CDG, we've kind of started working on release 2. So for release 2, we are focusing around patient summary, chronic disease management, and reason for encounter if we have enough feedback from the community to kind of move it forward, and just building on that release 1. So, next slide, please. So this is the schedule we're looking at. For this release, we're going to try something a little bit different. We're going to try and, for various reasons, one of them because we wanted to have some stuff ready for future scopings for the CDG, for the TDG as well as the AUPSPT. We wanted to try and get our patient summary stuff, anything that was related to patient summary stuff, done early and sort of a bit finalized as early as possible. So we're actually going to break up the AUCDI R2 into 2 parts. We've been working on the patient summary stuff, and we want to have that part of AUCDI released for public review at the end of this month. So I should be able to present all of that at the next TDG I think it was the 28th. But then at mid-March, on the time up to mid-March, we'll be working around chronic disease management. So things like goals, follow-ups, and some of those other bits and pieces. So we'll be working on that starting at our face-to-face meeting next week, which is the day before the TDG. But yeah, we'll be starting that and doing that over the next few months. So I guess in summary, the patient summary stuff will come out end of November. The chronic disease stuff for AUCDI R2 will come out mid-March. And then at the end of June, we'll publish just like an amalgamation of all of that. So R1 plus all of the new stuff as well. So that's kind of what we're looking to do until the end of June. And I think that's all I wanted to say. I will go into more detail around the patient summary stuff, the new additions in the next meeting. And I think I can pass back to Andrew or Danielle.
All right. Danielle, are there additional slides you wanted to cover, or is...
No, I don't think so. I think that's everything that I needed to talk about in terms of what we're going to be doing next meeting and coming up. So I guess we can either finish early, or if there's something that we want to circle back to or talk more on, we've got 8 minutes.
I think that's pretty much it for today. throw it out to the group again if there's anything anyone wants to bring up. Otherwise, we can wrap up. All right, great. Thank you all for coming out today. And then just a reminder, the last ballot reconciliation issue will be addressed next Wednesday at the fire work group meeting. So hopefully during our next TDG, we have some good news to report. All right, have a good rest of your day, all.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.